Live streaming is on.
Hello, everyone. This is Adam Meister, the Bitcoin Meister, the Disrupt Meister. Welcome to This Week in Bitcoin. Today is Friday the 13th. Yes, it is December the 13th, 2019. Strong hand. Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin. Offended by selling. Conviction. Holders of last resort. All right, we got some hardcore Bitcoiners here today. BTC Benny is coming in from Canada. Jeet is here. And of course, JW Weatherman is in parts unknown. And he is also here. So I am pumped. Hello, my elite friends in the chat. You've been looking forward to this all-star cast for a while. Yesterday, we brought you Trace Mayer, so check out the archives, of course. But we'll talk a little bit about proof of keys as we move on in the show. But what I want to bring up first is like some breaking news here that the bottle pay is discontinued now. They're ending it because of KYC type of threats. BTC Benny, can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, so from what I saw, it just seems like there's some new regulations coming into effect in early January in the UK.
Whoa.
Hey, you still got me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so there would be some regulations coming into effect in early January that would more or less cause them to need to collect an undesirable amount of data. Well, any data is undesirable to collect on behalf of their customers, users. So, KYC, AML, they need to collect a lot of stuff that they just don't want to do. Those unfamiliar, bottle pay, basically an easy way to tip on via Lightning in a custodial manner and then withdraw to a non-custodial wallet if you choose. So rather than let it happen, they just opted to shut it down and close the doors. It is sad to see because it was a cool service. I will say that if you're still looking for like a tipping type thing, tippin.me is an alternative. It wasn't quite as widely used, but something else to check out. It is sad to see. Hopefully BTC Pay server does something with it, or they can open source the code and somebody can pick up the slack.
But is the same threat going to happen again? Or are we going to go through the same situation where the person's scared of KYC?
Well, it seemed to be because it's UK based.
Yeah, but okay, so it can't be a UK based one. That's there you go. That's for now at least. Okay, JW, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is similar to what happened with the Open Node guys, where they're doing smaller amounts of transactions, and so a lot of us thought, okay, they're going to be able to get away with not having to do KYC, AML, know your identity, all of this garbage when you just want to send your buddy $5. You don't have to upload a copy of your driver's license and give this little startup your social security number. So it seemed cool, and then same thing happened with Open Node. They got to a point where the regulatory eye they felt like it was going to be on them, and so they went KYC and Bottle Pay, I think, has executed this much better, and I think they made an honorable decision just to shut down the service because it is useless to have a service where you can only do small amounts. It's serving that niche, and now you gotta do all this regulatory stuff. It just doesn't make sense. So I think they made the right call there. Hopefully they'll find a way to pivot to another jurisdiction. But it does kind of show the importance of being able to do this on Lightning because Lightning's non-custodial. There's a lot of problems that we could solve with custodial solutions, but the thugs won't let us. And that's why we have Bitcoin. So that's why we have Lightning. So it's a shame. I hope those guys figured out. It was cool. It was the only way that I ever was able to tip anybody on Twitter and not feel like an idiot that I couldn't get it figured out. Hopefully other services will come along. But really, if it's custodial, I think we're going to just continue to see this.
Okay. Well, I will say this about these guys, great minds. I hope they move to maybe there'll be a completely another project where they don't even have to worry about government regulation. That maybe I'm wishing too much there, but hey, good luck to those dudes. Jeet, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, the immediate thought that comes to mind is like, what a loss for the UK. Anytime you have some type of disruptive technology like this, like, I mean, how many times is the internet going to come across, right? So when you have something like the internet or, the new potential gold, which, gold's been here for tens of thousands of years, people have used it. You got the new potential gold, it kind of makes sense to, potentially allow things to grow a little bit and have a little bit of a safe harbor for some of these new inventions. And it's just kind of sad to see that they're letting that opportunity pass by. This level of like oversight into transactions is not something that's historically been there because, people have generally dealt in cash. So the fact that money's gone digital allows people to track it better, but it's not entirely clear that it actually solves some of those problems. Everyone has to obey the law, but it's just kind of see that the law is not adjusting for the potential opportunity. You see the same thing in New York City where there's like a lot of great startups and a lot of smart young people. They should be doing stuff with crypto, but some of them feel a little bit hamstrung and a little bit intimidated because in order to get a license from the government to run I forget what it's called, the Bitcoin license, it's like millions of dollars, right? So two people in a garage making Apple don't have $1 million, and it just feels like a kind of a waste on whoever the regulator is to let the opportunity go by.
Yeah, it is a shame. Now we're gonna get to the opposite of this, and what I think is sort of the opposite of this, at least an article. And JW, you were the one who actually informed me about this. That Square is paying this pseudonymous Bitcoin developer, a Lightning guy, a grant. The Square crypto grant is going to ZMNSCPXJ. Obviously, that's not his real name. We don't really know where he is, but a big corporation is paying him to work for them. And this is the world we live in now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's awesome. I have been paid more money as a pseudonymous person than I thought I was going to be able to over the last couple of years. And it's actually not that big of a deal. If it's a for-profit company, you have to give them some paperwork. But if that paperwork isn't accurate, so you have to give them a W-9 form. If that paperwork isn't accurate, it doesn't matter as long as you pay your taxes. So I've been paid from big companies that have given me money. They probably know that my real name isn't JW Weatherman, but they don't really care. That's what it says on the W-9. And I've talked to my attorneys and made sure, hey, it's fine as long as you pay your taxes. It doesn't matter. The point is so they can track it. But at the end of the day, if you pay what you owe, then you're not liable for anything, right? And there's scary language on that W-9 that says you go to prison for the rest of your life or something. But that's my current understanding. I'm assuming that they took a similar route, and it's freaking awesome because you don't have to worry about weirdos showing up at your house because they're on some competing chain. There was a post from Greg Maxwell not long ago about all the ways that he has been harassed, and it was completely terrifying and eye-opening, even to me. And I'm a paranoid weirdo, right? Like I use a pen name, and it still scared me. So I think this is a great development. I think it should happen all the time. Like why do I need to know your meat bag address in order to do business with you? It just doesn't make sense.
I agree. Now the ZM guy, he's in Asia probably. So there's no W-9 involved in this thing. I on his side, I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah, international payments are a little bit different, and I don't even know how that is supposed to work. I know I've done it, and I've probably done it wrong. I think most people that do.
And so that's what I'm wondering how Square can get away with this. I mean, I love that they're doing it.
So I mean, I've hired people out of Asia before and talked to CPAs, and they've said, no, there's nothing that you have to do. It's an expense. You write it off as an expense. They're not an embargoed country, and you don't have to do any paperwork between. I've never felt great about that. Like I still feel like someday I'm going to get audited and I'm going to write a check. But that's what I've been told, and I've heard it from a couple different CPAs that if they're not a U.S. citizen, that tracking system just kind of gets broken, and the Taiwanese people have to handle it on their end or whatever to get their tax money. So it may have even been easier with him not being a U.S. citizen than what I've gone through. But really, we live at a time where you can spin up a pen name. Like JW Weatherman didn't exist 2 years ago, right? You can spin up a pen name. You can do some reasonably passable work builds up a reputation, and you can earn a living. My son Will, he's working under a pen name. He's 16. He's never had any income that wasn't under his pen name. So he may live his whole life where he always gets his paycheck in Bitcoin from people that don't know where he lives. And, as a father, that's great for me because I know he doesn't have to get harassed in some of the ways that people get harassed.
Oh, wow, that's a pretty cool take, man. That's interesting. Hey, Jeet, and your thoughts on this?
Dude, I imagine I didn't think Taiwan. My first thought was there's some kid who's in Malaysia, living off a US level income and then with the cost basis of like a Southeast Asian country. That's amazing. So, there's a little bit of an arbitrage there where somebody who's like really smart, but they're in a country like Malaysia or Philippines where they don't have as many opportunities. They just are able to service customers in the United States and they're making US wages, but their costs are so low. So it's kind of cool. And it opens up some opportunities that if their like local economy isn't that hot, they can kind of do this type of thing. My other thought too, which I'd love to get your guys' take on, was I totally imagine that there's probably some smart programmers who are, in startups and, maybe on other open source projects, and they're kind of maybe too high profile to work on Bitcoin or to work on, potentially kind of political, dissident type of technology. So it'd be kind of cool to think that, this opens up like a larger pool of developers to develop on Bitcoin and other things that are seen as controversial.
Oh yeah, that's a really a good point there. That people that are known can now be unknown. Yeah, that's BTC Benny. Any your thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I think the interesting part for me is that what we're getting to a point where, first of all, this was impossible just a few years back, right? To have a pseudonymous person getting paid remotely, not having to know who they are, not having to go through the banking system. All of a sudden, we're in a place where you can no longer have, or it's possible to not have either identity politics or discrimination creep into the workplace, because you don't know who the person is. As it's the work speaks for itself. So if somebody can basically create a service or complete a job and do it well, you don't know who the individual is. You just pay them for what they're doing. There's no longer the worry of, oh, this person didn't get the job because they are X, Y, or Z. There's no longer that there's a wage gap because of this, or this person was discriminated against for whatever reason. It's literally just the qualified people get the work. And so it takes that kind of identity politics out of the workplace as well. And I think that's a great place to be, where people can achieve what they can achieve and not have to worry about that aspect of it, which I don't know. I just started kind of going down that line of thought recently, and I find it to be an interesting one.
All right, let me hang on a second. You there still, Benny?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. JW, any thoughts on what Jeet or Benny had to say?
No, I mean, I think they're spot on. It's exciting, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that haven't gotten jobs because they were white. There's a lot of people that haven't gotten jobs because they're black or Indian or whatever. And it is cool that that's going away. And, I think that it's worse now than it was pre-internet. And now that we do have internet money, it can be like it was way back when people just hired the person, 100 years ago, most people were too hungry to screw over their neighbor because they didn't like the way they looked, right? And I think we're getting back to the point where people will just pick the person that does the best work. They're not going to ask, hey, by the way, are you white? Because I have some quota, positive or negative. Yeah, it's exciting, man. It's a really good development in the midst of a lot of shitty ones, but I think it can overwrite most of the ones that we're worried about.
All right. Hire Malaysians and Filipinos, you big companies out there. Give them some opportunities if they're the best dudes. Use Bitcoin. We don't really need to know who the heck they are. We're getting into a whole new realm here. Now, I want to thank FF2K. He sent $5 in the chat. CS2 sent $10. And he says, in the world of technology, Bitcoin is alive on the internet. Its heart beats every 10 minutes. Oh, yeah, I like that. Pound that like button, people. If you guys got questions, you can do that super chat. You can type in Bitcoin Meister there. We will answer your questions. We are all looking at that chat. I want to move on to some big controversy here, and I will start off with JW. That Keepkey Kraken found out that Keepkey is vulnerable. If you have one in your possession, someone could get a hold of your Bitcoin if you don't have a passphrase on it. Okay, now I don't want to freak anyone out like that. I was not a Keepkey fan for various reasons, and they've been selling them for like $5 a piece lately. Again, if you keep it in your possession and you've got a passphrase, you're cool. But JW, your thoughts on this?
So I'm not a big fan of hardware wallets in general. I think the big lesson here is not to focus on Keepkey, because we've seen vulnerabilities released on Open for like OpenDime, Rodolfo Novak's company, Cold Card. We've seen vulnerabilities for Cold Card in the last month or 6 weeks. We've seen vulnerabilities in Trezor over the last couple of years. There's been vulnerabilities in Ledger. And so it's not just a Keepkey issue. These things are a bad idea. Fundamentally, they're a bad idea. And I don't want you guys to freak out and start trying to move your coins, because then you'll do something asinine and screw up. You got to be really careful. If you've got money on one of these things, take a deep breath. If it's not connected to a device, you don't have to freak out. You have a reasonable amount of time, several months, let's say, before I think that you're likely to get burned by something. But hardware wallets, they don't, like in this case, there's not even a secure element, right? So the shitty smart card that you get from your business, to get in the front door that has the chip, that maybe you slide into a crappy smart card reader, that has a secure element on it. They didn't even bother to do this with these devices. But even if you did that, you can go look at my Twitter feed. I asked a really prominent security researcher just a couple days ago named Dan Kaminsky. He did the first security review of Bitcoin, actually, and was one of the people that helped expose Craig Wright as a fraud. I said, look, if it did have a secure element and I threw a bunch of Bitcoin on it and sent it to you and didn't give you the information, how much Bitcoin would I have to put on this, just, off the cuff, to be confident you'd take the time to steal it, right? Very good thought experiment. And he said roughly 100K. That means that's the first time he's ever done it, right? So I send him an open dime, or I send him a Cold Card, or I send him a Trezor. His off the cuff is, it might take him $100,000 worth of effort, or maybe he's thinking half that, because he's actually going to take the time to do that. So people respond and say, oh, well, you do multi-sig. Well, look, it's $100,000 per device, right? So if there's 4 devices on the marketplace, we're talking about what? Maybe 30 man weeks, right? Because these guys are really expensive. They're 200 plus an hour guys. So 30 man weeks, and you have every hardware device that's out there. So if you're storing large amounts of money on this thing and you're expecting it to protect you physically, it's security theater. It's not a good idea. Stop it. But a more important problem with these things is that they usually, the people that buy them are buying them because they're user friendly. They're not going to set up their own node most of the time. And so, you buy a Trezor from Amazon, you think you're doing the right thing. You shared your Bitcoin balance and your home address with Trezor. That's the reality of the situation. And that's what people should be way more concerned about than somebody just grabbing it, out of their drawer and stealing their Bitcoin funds.
Okay, this sounds like Trace from last night. That last part about giving your address to Trezor, he brought up that same thing. So my question for you, JW, is what should the average Joe do? What should the average Joe's storage protocol be?
So if you're storing more than $50,000, let's say US worth of Bitcoin, you shouldn't use anything other than Bitcoin Core. And the only exception to that would be, and I was forced into doing this, right? Because I planned on writing a doc that was just going to walk people through using Bitcoin Core. I did end up writing a small Python script similar to Glacier Protocol. So Glacier Protocol is a good option. I'd recommend that. It's just hard to use. It's a hassle. So what I did is I created yeticold.com. It's a Python script that walks you through setting up Bitcoin Core. You have an online and an offline machine. It sucks, though, in the sense that you do have to trust that little bit of code that I wrote isn't doing anything malicious. So it's far less ideal than just being able to trust Bitcoin Core. But that's the best that I can offer right now. What I definitely would say is you don't want anything other than Bitcoin Core to be doing critical things like generating the randomness for your seeds or your private keys. like it's barely trustworthy as it is. Let me put this in context. There's critical code in Bitcoin Core right now that's being written, and there's 2 or 3 developers that look at it regularly. And Bitcoin Core is probably 100 times more reviewed than anything else. So don't use anything else. It's already bad enough.
All right. This obviously people are freaking out now. But so I'm going to say I know people that keep more than $50,000 on a Trezor and everything. But we're not all going to agree on this stuff. So Jeet, your take.
Yeah, I think, this is so tough. So, one of the things that comes to mind for me is, there's been several of these like situations where this pops up, and you have the wallet, and you feel like, okay, well, now I'm a target, right? There was I think it's just confusing, right? Because the risk is if you go to upgrade in the process of upgrading or switching things around, like JW brought up, you could actually misplace your Bitcoin, right? Because you're in a mad rush, you're confused. People knowing that. Like, for example, when Electrum was targeted like 2 years ago, people knew that Electrum had an error. So then people would post like fake Electrum kind of web pages for you to go to and kind of target you in that way. And that's like the risk. And so I think there's just mass confusion. So I think the question for JW is like, how should we think about wallets? Or there's so many different types of hardware wallets. There's Ledger, there's Treasure. Let's say Cold Card. So what are the kind of axes of security that you think about? Like one would be, for example, how complicated is the device, or has it been broken?
Here's the fundamental
what you use to kind of even start to judge.
Right. It's a really good question. So the fundamental problem is that the best that we can do, like the best that humanity can do to create a device that you physically have access to and is unhackable, is these secure elements. These secure elements are not even close to unhackable. So in that thread, Dan Kaminsky explained that he would use Tempest, which means he would take that device, he'd put it in a rig that listens to all the electromagnetic chatter that comes off the device when it's crunching numbers. We don't have any technology to do that or to prevent that. Humanity is just not capable of that. So the problem with hardware wallets, when they are marketed and when they're presented to people as if somebody gets this device, they can't take your Bitcoin, is that it's just fundamentally untrue. It also highlights why Bitcoin itself is kind of incredible and cryptography is kind of incredible. Because if you, for example, have a multi-sig setup, let's say you use Bitcoin Core like YetiCold.com would have you do. You use a multi-sig setup and somebody gets a hold of one of your private keys. There's not enough computing power in the universe to be able to hack your Bitcoin, right? That really is the promise of what hardware wallets are offering. But if you get access to those private keys, even if they're on a chip that's a quote secure element, all bets are off. So use multi-sig, use Bitcoin Core. It is a pain in the ass. It's a pain in the butt, but do that if it's a significant amount of money. Now, if you've got, 10, 15, 20, 30, $40,000, use an open node, not an open node, a cold card. Like Rodolfo is a super cool guy. It's a cool product. He's always making it more fun and interesting to use. Totally appropriate for some, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe it's good up to 100,000 or 150,000. These are just gut feel, off the gut sort of numbers. I mean, Dan Kaminsky didn't spend 6 months or even 6 hours thinking about what it would cost him to hack that. It was just off the cuff, right? So use these as general guidelines, general gut feel. But if it's if it's a lot more than $50,000, don't use anything other than Bitcoin Core. If it's less, then any of these are probably fine.
Benny.
Yeah, so I guess I've got further questions for JW here. So my understanding of a lot of these attacks are they are physical. Obviously, there's an element of trust when it comes to what is the software doing, even like in just generating the seed. You were talking about entropy. I know that Rodolfo with the cold card allows you to introduce your own entropy even by rolling dice when you're setting up the seed. So that hopefully would, and it's open source, so hopefully that would mitigate some of that. How much of what you're talking about is remote versus getting your hands on the physical device, and how much of that is affected by introducing an additional passphrase on top of your seed?
So the real problem with a lot of this stuff is that even though it's open source, there's just not that many people reviewing the code, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if Trezor put out a fix, how many people do you think are actually competent and are looking at that fix every time they do it to make sure that they didn't just change the code so that when you put in your dice, it is ignored, right? There's no way for you to know that unless you actually review the code. So even though it's open source, it has to be super popular open source in order to be secure. And that's why I say there's only one that's super popular and open source, and that's Bitcoin Core. So if you want a trustworthy source of randomness for your private keys, use Bitcoin Core, don't use anything else. And there's kind of three different ways that I look at hardware wallets, or three different major problems. One is privacy, another is that they're not a full node, and then the third is just that they promise physical security when they don't. Then when they're writing checks their butt can't cash, right? There is no physical security. It's deceptive to make people think that. The full node issue is a design flaw, and that is that when people are buying these, they're buying them because they want to be able to plug them into an untrustworthy laptop and still not have their Bitcoin stolen. But the laptop is doing a lot of important things. It's verifying, let's say that you are more extreme than most and that laptop's a full node. It's verifying that you're getting genuine Bitcoin. Do you want to actually get genuine Bitcoin? Then you better have a full node that's on a trustworthy device. You can't have an untrustworthy laptop that's your full node and plug in your cold card and be confident that you're getting genuine Bitcoin. So every single thing that laptop does that's important, that's not happening on the hardware wallet, is a huge security design flaw. Another thing that's come up recently is address generation. So change addresses are generated on the laptop. Well, what if that change address is modified in some way to only the attacker knows where it's going, or maybe it's their own address? So every single thing that laptop does that the hardware wallet doesn't do that's important is a big problem. And I think I think that's pretty deceptive marketing, because the only people that buy these hardware wallets are buying them because they don't feel like they can trust their laptop. So logically, what you'd have to do to address all those problems is move all of those functions slowly over to a hardware wallet. And what do you have when you're done doing that? You have Bitcoin Core running on a Ubuntu laptop that's freshly installed, doing everything that a full node does, because everything a full node does is security sensitive. So you don't want that to be anywhere else. And then the third area is privacy. And you have to be using your hardware node again with a full node. So you might as well just have a full node. But the reason that people buy these hardware devices is because they don't feel competent to set up a full node. So a lot of it is, these things are cool. I would like to play with them. I'd play with them a lot more if I could buy them without having to give up my identity and be on a list, because, I'm paranoid. But I think they're fun, and that's fine. But it's when they start making you feel like you're safe, either with physical access or with an insecure laptop you're plugging it into, or using it as it's designed out of the box. You just plug it in and you use their centralized service to check your balances. All of those things are where I have a problem, where the marketing and the reason that people are buying them don't match reality. So that's my take on that. If it's a small amount, you don't really care about privacy. And to be clear, when I say that you're sharing your home address with Trezor when you use a Trezor, it's not just when you buy the device. It's also when you plug it in to check your balance, because it calls Trezor services from your IP address. Maybe you're using Tor, maybe you're using a VPN. But look, these things are marketed to people that are not super technical. And so I know what they're doing. They're plugging the damn things in, and they're giving their IP address, which is easily correlated with their home address to anybody that cares to go through the trouble, to Trezor, along with every single UTXO that they have. I don't think most people buying Trezors know that. And that's why I have a problem with them. It's the deception.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to jump in there, this is such a good point that it's kind of like, we're transitioning all of our valuable stuff, all of our relationships, all of our actual physical money and everything to digital from physical. And in physical, I feel like we have a set of kind of procedures and things that work. So if I have like an expensive, if I have a stick of gold, I'm not sure I don't feel comfortable in the security environment in an apartment or a house that's open, near a major street, and somebody could come in and just break it in and take it. So, okay, maybe I'll leave it at the bank or something. And so, when you're traveling to and from places, if you're going into a bad area, maybe don't leave your laptop on the back seat of the car, because if somebody sees it, they're going to maybe try to go and get it. And so there's like these physical things that we do to try to like protect our money and our valuable stuff. And now that everything is digital, I don't think we have any sense of what is, like there's some neighborhoods in San Francisco where if you leave your car with the windows up, the window's gonna get broken. We don't know where those neighborhoods are digitally. And I think we also just have no sense of like what is actually valuable and what's not. So, when somebody grabs your Twitter account or they grab, your Facebook account and hack into you, they're actually hacking into all of your relationships. So there's a 2-bit idiot on Twitter. He's been hacked like 5 or 6 times. It's like every week he's got a new hack. And, these screenshots keep coming up where it's, he tweets somebody like urgently, like, hey, I need to get some Bitcoin in. Somebody on the other side is thinking like, well, I value this relationship. The guy's in trouble. I might as well send him some money. And so they're able to just kind of take advantage of these things. So I don't think people yet have the sense online for safety that they do like physically.
JW?
Yeah, no, I think he's spot on there, man. I think that's absolutely true. Like in physical things, we have pretty good instincts. If you leave your laptop on your back seat, and it gets stolen, people are going to be like, you're an idiot. But when it comes to stuff like this, you're really relying on marketing from the companies that are selling you products, and then weirdo randos like me to just complain when I don't think they're good. And that's a tough thing to try to navigate. That said, I don't want to overstate the risk here. There haven't been a whole lot of people saying, hey, my Bitcoins have been hacked. So don't panic. Don't do anything dumb. Take your time. Make a plan to migrate to Bitcoin Core for your Bitcoins that are, significant value and in cold storage. I obviously put a lot of work into yeticold.com with my son, and I think it's pretty decent, but it's in beta, right? So take it slow and be careful. But the other thing is we got to put this in context with like the rest of the banking system and everything else. Like it's not just Bitcoin, right? So you might be freaking out that your Bitcoin can be stolen right now. The stuff in your bank is absurd. Like my biggest problem with Unchained Capital and Casa Whole is that they're trying to bring security of Bitcoin back to the banking system era. It's not that banks are safer, they're worse, right? It's much easier, I promise you, to impersonate you with a bank, do a SIM swap, do a couple other things, and draw money out of your bank account than it is to steal your Bitcoin right now. Even if it's on, what is this, a Keepkey, right? Like I would much rather have my money in a Keepkey right now with all the issues that it has than have it in a US bank account, because that stuff is riddled with security holes that you wouldn't believe. The only difference is that the taxpayers fit the bill on all that. Right now, all of those costs are hidden in the banking system because it'll probably be reversed, and you'll probably get an FBI agent assigned to your case for free, and you'll probably get all these hidden benefits. But we're paying for them. We're paying for them in the fact that beef is 4% more expensive every year for everybody, and that's part of that expense goes to covering all the nonsense in the banking system that makes you think that you're safe when you're absolutely not. But you don't care because you don't realize you're paying for it no matter what.
All right. Anyone with conclusionary remarks on this this topic here of storage?
To me, it still feels like there's a spectrum. Like again, as JW was saying, it depends on the amount, what you're trying to do, and again, always assume that if somebody gets your physical device, well, they very likely will get a hold of your Bitcoin. That should always be the assumption, and be ready on hand with it. But there's always going to be worries, unless you end up doing a multi-sig setup like JW was saying with Bitcoin Core, and realistically, how many people are actually going to do that and be able to learn and do that? We'll see. So, I guess it just goes to prove things are still very imperfect, and hopefully they'll get better. And hopefully we get to a point where there are enough eyeballs on certain products and the code behind it that we can be more confident in the way it's executing. But time will tell.
I will say this. You do have to put it all in perspective. Like JW said, better than banks. With that in mind, proof of keys, people, it's coming up. If you're new to the space and you still have your coins on Coinbase or whatever, this is the time to learn how to send your Bitcoin properly. Okay, that's what you should take proof of keys as. We talked about, Trace and I talked about it on the show last night. You can watch it. Does anyone have comments on proof of keys before we get off of this storage topic? Are you guys enthused? Do you think it'll bring down some exchanges at all?
Yeah, I think it'll be kind of a repeat of last year. I think more people will probably partake. I don't think it's necessarily going to take down any exchanges, but hey, hopefully it becomes more of a mainstay of the Bitcoin ethos, and every year more and more people partake. I'd like to see it become pretty widespread, but I don't think it's there yet. I don't really have Bitcoin with any custodians, so I get to just watch from afar, but I'll celebrate like everybody else.
We know with proof of keys is very interesting because we have all these companies out there that are now offering to hold your Bitcoin, and they're going to give you interest. So some people are still going to keep their Bitcoin with those third parties, which I think is unfortunate. I am not down with any of the companies that give interest on the Bitcoin. I say control your own private key, people. Jeet, your thoughts on proof of keys?
Yeah, I think I like the idea a lot. The reason why I like it is because if you don't have this proof of keys type of situation where the reserves, let's just call them exchanges, as like compared to banks, if somebody isn't paying attention to the bank, then what's going to happen is really well connected people are going to get loans for cheap, and they're not going to pay the loans back, and then the losses are absorbed by the other depositors. So this is something that's happened historically in the United States. Happened in India just recently with a massive bank failure. And this is a bank that was in, for 60, 70 years, it was operating perfectly, and complete failure. And the people who got all their money out were the really well-connected people, the people who've been using it for cheap loans, very well-connected people. And in almost every single country that I've Googled around and looked, you've been able to see a similar scenario. And I think we got to avoid that type of thing in our space, in the Bitcoin space, by self-regulating. And that's through stuff like proof of keys, where you just kind of, gut check the exchanges and see, are they prepared? And it just kind of potentially exposes that. It's like when the tide goes out in the water, you find out who's swimming naked. And we'll find out, if there's potentially players who are being unsafe or don't have the proper reserves.
JW.
Yeah, I love it, man. I think this is maybe going to be Trace's greatest legacy, is coming up with this concept, because this is one of the cases where I do want people to freak out, right? Don't freak out over Keepkey and move your Bitcoins rapidly, but do freak out in this case. And the reason I say that is that if you're listening, there's probably, this is my gut feel, of course, a 1 in 20 chance that the exchange that your Bitcoins are on is going to be insolvent over this event. So if you're comfortable with that, leave them there. But the great thing about this bank run concept is that if they're running at a reserve, the people that are the most fearful, that don't take them out on the third, that take them out on the second, are going to be better off. But the people that take them out on the first are going to be better off still, right? Who's going to get left holding the bag when there is an insolvent exchange? And if this does force an exchange to go bankrupt, it's going to be the people that moved first. So if you have your money on one of these exchanges, I do think it's a really good idea to not only do it on the third, but do it a couple days early, because you don't want to be the last one to pull it out. You're going to be the guy that is the case study that tells everybody else that the exchange was insolvent, right? You don't want to be the last one without a chair. So do panic if you have money on an exchange, just, for a few days. Panic, get it off. And then if you're a degenerate trader and you got to put it back on, put it back on. But when you got a 1 in 20 chance, or maybe even a 1 in 50 chance of all of that money being vaporized, take it off for 3 days, right?
I really think you put it in perspective there. I think those are good numbers to think of. There's between a 2 and 5% chance that this movement could actually bring down an exchange, and you don't want to be the person on that exchange. So those are, and again, he's pulling those numbers out of his head. I think I'm thinking of those numbers right now. You see my head move. I think that's a good way to think of it. 2 to 5% chance that this brings down in an exchange, and that's big enough that that is not worth the risk at all. By the way, all these dudes are linked to below. Pound that like button. All right. Speaking of, well, we're going to move on to mining real quick here. Jeet, you read that report, that mining report. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I read the report from @BitFury George, who's the CEO of BitFury, which is a mining company based in Georgia, and he kind of put together an interesting analysis, which says that, hey, there's kind of this paradigm shift happening in the way that you run a profitable mining company. So in every industry, there's whatever the new thing is can generally charge higher prices because they're solving something new. So for example, Bitmain has been like the boogeyman in the space for such a long time. And for a number of years, we're all really concerned because they were producing top tier mining equipment. And so it kind of presented a concentration risk. But one of the things that is beautiful is that, when somebody's making that much excess profit margin above beyond what you like normally consider and beyond the opportunity set, there was a ton of people who were looking at that like really hungry eyes and thinking like, I kind of want to be making those type of profit margins. So of course you had a ton of people and a ton of capacity and mental energy going into, well, hey, how do we copy their hardware? How do we copy their methods for putting together these chips? And who can we hire away from their company? And then sure enough, other people started to develop equivalent kind of technology. And Bitfury George is just pointing out that, hey, this is kind of interesting that now that the kind of mining hardware layer is becoming a little bit more commoditized and that there's not that much variance between the best mining hardware and the worst mining hardware, that's no longer some place to compete. So if you have a better relationship with Bitmain than me, it doesn't mean that you're going to make more money than I am. Now the relationship is equal because I have alternative suppliers. So anytime somebody has a monopoly, they have bad service and they overcharge, quote unquote overcharge. But now that there's competitors, the price is down, anybody can become a miner. So now where do you compete? So now that revenue has kind of potentially come down a little bit, the other place that you look for is your costs. And the largest cost in mining operations is electricity. So I think he's pointing this out because I think my understanding is that he has kind of, Bitfury has like sweetheart deals where they're contracted with like local large utilities and they're getting really cheap electricity prices. Similarly, you see miners kind of crowding around places with hydroelectricity because that type of renewable energy is extremely cheap. So everyone now is going to be focused on reducing their costs for their mining equipment. Where is the lowest cost place? It's where you have renewable energy. And then if somebody wants to make an even bigger investment, we're talking 10, 20 years in the future, the lowest cost energy is, of course, nuclear power. So nuclear power is something that is actually extremely safe relative to all the fears that people have. But this is how something like Bitcoin, which is just a pure price signal, gets all these people interested and involved and acting all these different ways. And it kind of leads to new breakthroughs that we wouldn't have seen without it. So right now the breakthrough is, wow, we have really strong ASIC mining equipment. And the future breakthrough is this is going to lead to nuclear power becoming popularized again and delivering free or low cost, cheap electricity for everyone. So now the world's constrained because nobody wants the people in Africa or Asia to become more developed because it's going to cause climate chaos, right? So there's these kind of, it feels like kind of an effort to, not have them develop as quickly, but with free nuclear energy and, those constraints are no longer there. So it's kind of a really optimistic way to think about the world. And that was maybe not the full focus of his article, which was more on the commodity hardware, but that's the kind of vision that's like the natural, logical next step of that.
All right. I appreciate that you read that whole thing and gave us a good summary. Like that was not everyone could pull that off. Do you guys have any comments on the mining situation, JW or Benny?
Yeah. Actually, I think, 2 years ago, I was debating Luke Dash Jr. and Cobra as these guys were pushing for a proof of work change. And I was saying, look, we need to get to a point where these ASICs are commoditized because that's what secures the network. If we do a proof of work change, it resets the clock on that. And we have all this new opportunity to have just a few small people have a lot of control over the network because they're the only ones with that specialized hardware. It takes time for things to become commoditized. So I think it's awesome that only 2 years later, we're at the point where we're like, oh yeah, all the hardware is commoditized. That has a huge impact on Bitcoin security. Thank God that we did not change the proof of work. If it comes up in the future and there's another attempt, because that's one of those few attacks on Bitcoin that won't go away. There's always going to be the potential to convince a lot of people to change the proof of work and basically obliterate our security. So be aware of that. Be one of the people that are saying, no, bad idea. But it's awesome that we're in such a strong footing now compared to 2 years ago, where that, we had some pretty popular people advocating that and it was a viable possibility.
Yeah, that attack vector will come up again. It's all cyclical. I foresee that. I don't know when, but because there were legitimate names talking about it. So who knows? BTC Benny.
Yeah, it is nice to see that the further decentralization of mining itself. Especially ever since we ran smack dab into Moore's law, and now you have that time horizon where it takes a little bit longer for new chips to come out. It makes it a little less practical for people that are manufacturing the chips to hold on to them too long and mine themselves before pushing them out to market. So it does just kind of help the whole space in general, where there's kind of a little bit more equal access. It's nice to see new ASIC manufacturers pop up around the globe. I'm sure that will be further decentralized. There was a recent article about China having 66% of hash rate or something like that. There was a recent uptick, but I think that also, I could be mistaken, but that also coincided with some of the new chips that have just been started to hit the market. And since a lot of them are manufactured within China, then that could be coinciding with the initial, hey, we're going to run these a bit and then send them out. But again, if you look at the bigger trend, it is leaning towards things being kind of more globally diversified. There's a lot of it going on here in Alberta as well. There's stranded natural gas in northern Alberta, where I live, and you have people like Steve Barber, who are basically rolling up skids that are portable miners, and they're capturing natural gas that would have been just vented into the atmosphere, and they're capturing that waste and converting it into power to mine Bitcoin. So yeah, it's it leans towards the cheapest available power, and in this case, it's actually a plus for the environment as well, because that would have been terrible for the environment if it was vented. Now, instead of paying that carbon tax and polluting, it's now being burned and used for something good, which is securing the Bitcoin network. So yeah.
Awesome. Good bringing up Steve Barber. He's been on the show before. We've all hung out together. Good dude doing that. That's some creative stuff up there. All right, Jeet, since you started the topic, you have anything to say to conclude this topic?
No, I think this is awesome. This is the kind of dream of Bitcoin, that there's now something that stands outside all of these, people who want to interfere in the marketplace, and it just provides pure price signal, and it allows people to kind of coordinate around that. So super excited about the potential for this. Sorry, one other thing that just kind of came to my mind. I was at a Bitcoin or a kind of Bitcoin-ish fintech conference in Toronto, and one of the folks there was a kind of an academic. They put together an analysis of FX rates, the official FX rates published by governments versus the local Bitcoin's FX rates, and they kind of saw a correlation between when the price of the currency makes large movements on local Bitcoins. It kind of predicts that, oh, wow, so now that all these people are trying to get their money out of that currency, and there's a Bitcoin premium there, what's happening is there's going to be a move, or there has been a move, where the government is messing around with the supply of that local currency. So this is something that's come up in places like Argentina and, of course, Venezuela. But it's kind of cool because those governments depend on manipulating the price in all the newspapers and everything else. So if there's some source that says, the price that they're telling you is actually a lie, the real price is much higher for your currency. And that means, by the way, that all your food is much more expensive and everything else. It's just a cool signal for those people in those countries to have, some alternative source than their local newspaper to understand what their real situation is. So that's just a small example, but that's the kind of vision here.
Yeah, for those who can dig that deep in those countries, though, to find these alternative sources. I mean, that's the thing. Most people just go with what the government tells them to do. Now, on that topic, the government telling you to do something, I didn't go over this topic with any of you before the show, so maybe you read the article. But in Greece, they say that citizens have to spend 30% of their income now electronically, or they're going to get penalized. Because this is a way to avoid people not paying their taxes. Who has comments on this?
Yeah, I'll dive in. I was talking about it on the show the other day, but yeah, essentially you have to spend 30% of your given monthly income electronically, and if you fail to do so, whatever remains out of that 30% will incur, I don't know if they're calling it a fine or a tax, but it's 22% of whatever's left. So let's say you make 1,000 euros in a month and you now need to spend 300 euros of electronically, then that remaining 100 euros will be taxed at a rate of 22%, which is insane. The war on cash is real. We also have in the same breath, there is another story about Italy too, where next year cash purchases over 2,000 euros will be illegal, and a year later, cash purchases over 1,000 euros will be illegal. And if you do allow for a cash purchase over a certain amount, you'll be fined. And if you refuse to accept credit cards, you'll get I believe it's a 30 euro fine plus a percentage of the disputed amount that was not allowed to be paid by the customer. So yeah, the war on cash is very much accelerating. But luckily, hopefully, people clue in and they can utilize Bitcoin.
Yes, utilize Bitcoin. Figure out ways with Bitcoin to get around all that. There's nonsense in those countries. I'm glad I'm not in Italy or Greece. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me jump in on that one because to your point earlier about like who can actually access the stuff outside of their country. The war on cash is a problem because it's kind of pitched as this way to get rid of crime and everything else, but the problem is that the people who are actually using cash are just kind of marginalized, poor people, or they're elderly people who don't know how to use like electronic payments. And cash still represents something like 50% of all the payments in the world today. So when you've seen other countries making moves like this to get rid of cash in the favor of digitized payments, the people who get impacted are the poor. So in India, they did something called demonetization. They took all the old $100 bills. They said those are illegal now. But you got to use these new $100 bills, which you only get from the bank. So you got to go to the bank, show up, and transfer it. And what ended up happening, of course, was all the really well-connected people showed up to the bank first, and the night before, they got all their money out. And so the people who were left standing in line for days were like just the kind of normal, average, everyday people. And the poor people who are like selling vegetables and running their own small businesses, they're just completely disadvantaged because their middle-class customers don't even have cash to give them. So they're like stuck at the very edge of the network. And, when you have these like withdrawals of like, key services like that, it's the poor who are impacted the most. So this thing in Greece, it's kind of a great headline for them and it makes them look like they're getting a lot of stuff done. But it's also kind of dangerous because, in Greece, no one actually pays their, I shouldn't say no one, but very few people pay their tax according to all the newspaper stories. And I was reading this thing that apparently 5% of the population, which is the middle class, who have salaries, so it's easily visible, they're the ones who actually pay the tax. They pay about half the taxes, just those 5%. And so the really wealthy people already have, businesses outside of the country and bank accounts outside of the country. But your normal, average, everyday guy is just stuck there. Like, he doesn't even read the newspaper. He shows up like, wait, you're saying my dollar bill doesn't work anymore? So yeah, the impact of this, make no mistake, is going to be on the kind of marginalized people in the world.
Yeah, the real criminals aren't using cash; they're using HSBC.
Totally. And before you get too excited about not being in Greece or Italy or France or these places that are being more aggressive on cash, the reason that the US isn't that aggressive on cash is that it's more sophisticated, right? So everybody's freaking out about, China and its dystopia. Meanwhile, we have the greatest surveillance state the world's ever seen, right? Everybody's freaking out about demonetization or the war on cash in Greece right now. But you just said almost nobody pays taxes in Greece. I would love to be in Greece right now and being one of those people that don't pay taxes. I pay all of my taxes because I'm terrified of the Eye of Sauron, and I know it's here. It's not over in Greece. It's in the United States. We are the absolute best at collecting taxes. We're the best at surveillance. And we're good at propaganda. So we don't do stuff that's all rough and ready and we just pass a law at 30%. We just work out a deal with PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa behind the scenes. We make sure that Twitter censors the right stuff. And we get stuff done like a sophisticated empire, not like a bunch of retards that are going to go out there and make it obvious. So don't be too happy that you live in the land of the free, because we've got it dialed in.
So let me push back on that a little bit. One of the things that's important to note is that like economists have measures of who pays how much tax and how much they expect. There's actually less tax evasion in the United States than economists would predict, because people generally, like, even though I'm the first person to complain like the roads are bad and the taxes are definitely like too high and the government spending is very inefficient, but people like to feel like they're contributing towards something. So the amount of tax evasion is actually far lower than what you'd expect. So
that's what I'm saying.
That's
my point. The amount of tax evasion in the U.S. is far lower. You might say it's because we love paying taxes, but if you know very many Americans, you might change your mind. We don't love paying taxes. We hate paying taxes, but we're scared.
Good point. Okay.
We're terrified. I have sat through audits with a guy that makes $30,000 a year, and it took like 80 hours of torture of him going through all of his receipts. Like, we know how to make it sting, and we know how to send a message to a population that you don't evade taxes without having to seem so heavy-handed.
Jeet, you were saying?
No. I mean, it is really hard to tell, but I need to look more into it. But I do think that people like. Well, it's hard to say. I think your average person, I mean, there's definitely billionaires and things who can avoid the taxes just like in Greece. But I think your average person, maybe they don't like it and they complain about it, but they do pay their taxes. And I think I don't think it's all the surveillance state. I think some part of it is like people do feel like the government is providing legitimate services. And I think that the problem in places like Greece, India, is the government's not providing any services to begin with. So people feel very comfortable avoiding taxes. Like in Mexico, it's a similar situation. Nobody pays the taxes. I think that I think it's more driven by the lack of government services being delivered at all. So there's no public goods whatsoever. So the tax feels more like a mafia shakedown kind of thing.
I would argue that that's more propaganda. If you're a normal person in the United States and you call 911, you're not getting a cop to show up and take care of you until it's time to mop up the blood. I'm sure it's the same thing in the middle of nowhere in Pakistan, but we feel better about it because we've been propagandized since we were 3 years old in public school for the last 2 decades.
I will say this about what JW said about propaganda, that there are a lot of Americans who blindly believe, yes, must paying taxes makes me loyal, makes everything all right. They're not worried about like a lot of people are like, I got to pay my tax, like JW, I got to pay my taxes or else I'm going to get tortured with this audit. But there's some, because of the propaganda, and I'm not one to jump into these propaganda type of things and overblow it. But here I got to say that a lot of Americans are just like, yes, must pay taxes because they have that's the right thing to do. It supports the country. It makes us stronger.
But even that is propaganda. Is propaganda because the IRS publishes stuff regularly and says, if you get paid in cash and you're an American citizen, you don't pay any tax. So if you know that you have the opportunity because you're doing something, you're running some store in some tourist town and people are paying a lot of cash, the IRS will admit, like you can search for it, that they don't get on average any tax out of people that are primarily paid in cash. So the propaganda doesn't actually work, but if you're already paying taxes and you're forced into it, and what are you going to say? Like you might as well say that it's not so bad if it's already taken out of your paycheck, right? But we know empirically, if given the opportunity, the average American pays zero tax, just like the average Grecian, the average Indian. It's all a system of fear and intimidation, and I don't know. That's the end of my rant on that topic.
All right. Yeah, we all Bitcoin people, get into Bitcoin. All right, let's get into the Yenta, the gossip part of this show, real quick. BTC Benny, talk about Mark Cuban. I couldn't believe it. He says Bitcoin could be hacked. I mean, where is this? What is he? I couldn't believe he said that one line. Like, is he that confused or is he just angry? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so it's ironic coming out of a guy who had the foresight to make a bunch of his money in the tech bubble of the 90s to be dumping on the next big wave of interesting technology. But that said, a lot of the stuff that he recently said seemed to be FUD and just not correct. So part of it, he was saying it's too it's too difficult to use. But in the same breath, his team, the Dallas Mavericks, accepts Bitcoin. And he even in another interview said that they used to accept it, but then people didn't use it. But then the methods with which people could pay got easier. So then they brought it back so that people could utilize it. He also said it will never be a reliable, there's no chance it will ever be a reliable currency. And yet again, he accepts it as currency for his team. So it just seems like a lot of the stuff that he's saying doesn't quite line up. And to his point that it's difficult to use, is there a learning curve? Absolutely. There was with the internet. And look at us all now streaming a live show with the four of us, with an audience that is currently taking it in. But he's just this fact that he said that it got easier. And so they re-added it means that it's not static. It continues to evolve and grow. And for him to not see that is a tad ridiculous. I just think that he's very focused on the now. He wants to see that this is a globally used currency by everybody, and he's not really kind of zooming out and seeing the bigger picture is how it comes across to me. But I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this.
You guys, any thoughts on him?
So I know a little bit about Mark Cuban because I think he's that show that he's got and everything. He's such a popular business figure. So I do know a little bit about him, and one of the interesting things is, he's famous for bringing radio onto the internet. So, a lot of people, they've coded things, and he just literally said, "Let's put radio on the internet." So it's kind of cool that he was able to sell a company, broadcast.com, that was literally radio on the internet for $6.5 billion during the .com boom. The other interesting part of that story is he had $1.5 billion of that, or $1.4 billion of that, in Yahoo stock. So he was worried that we're in the middle of the .com bubble. This is not real money. So Yahoo stock is not a good currency, and I need to get out of it. So he set up a hedge with Goldman Sachs so that if the price of Yahoo stock went down, he would actually the hedge would increase in value, and so it would cancel out, and he would be able to preserve the value of that depreciating currency of Yahoo stock. And I think that it's kind of rich coming from him to say that Bitcoin's not going to be something, or there's no use case, or it needs to be spent day to day, because when he needed to protect $1.4 billion, he found a way to protect it. And I think in a similar way, there's a lot of people out there who don't have access to, real estate in different countries, or, Swiss bank accounts. And they're sitting there thinking, like, I'm not sure I trust the current financial system, and I want to hedge my bets a little bit. And Bitcoin is just, it's so popular now, and it's such an option that there's an entire kind of spectrum of people who don't have access to that stuff that's only available to millionaires. They don't have access to Goldman Sachs, but they need to hedge their bets. And so what are they going to do? The option becomes Bitcoin. It's so popular throughout the mainstream media. Famous athletes they accept it as currency. And so it's just becoming popularized, and it's going to become the new way that if you have a windfall of cash, the first place you should park it, throw some in Bitcoin and kind of, get off zero. Yeah. So I think that's kind of my take, that I really just don't believe him.
Pound that like button. I like that take. Okay, JW, any takes on Mark Cuban or?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with guys like Mark Cuban, and I think a lot of people overestimate how smart these guys are. I'm not saying that they're lazy or that they're dumb. They're certainly neither of those things. But a lot of the skill set that you need at that level is political. You got to, it's a little bit of right place, right time. It's a little bit political. If you've worked with guys like this, that they're not all that sharp technically, right? Like they're not technical geniuses. Well, how did he make money? He put radio on the internet. I guarantee you there were thousands of people that were like, yeah, that's really stupid. We're obviously going to have radio on the internet, right? Like but right place, right time, .com bubble. You could put anything on the internet for a little while there and get crazy valuations. And I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I'm just saying it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't get it. He's got a ton of money. He's got a ton of stuff going on. He's not as bright and as technically competent as a lot of people would think. And I'm sure, even though he's talking trash on Twitter, he has not taken the time to research monetary history for 25 minutes. So I'm not shocked.
All right, dudes. We have reached the end of the show here, and I want to hear from all of the guests, their conclusionary remarks, any stories they wanted to bring up, anything they want to promote. So we'll start with Jeet.
Yeah. So super pumped about this conversation. I think the key takeaways were that get smarter about, being digital online and the kind of safety and stuff that you need. And also that a lot of this, the other thing for me was just the war on cash and how there's a gradient of technical people versus non-technical. And a lot of the stuff that doesn't necessarily impact us and we're safe from, there's a lot of non-technical people that it impacts. So those were just my two key takeaways. The other cool thing I want to point out is there was a recent election in the UK where the pro-Brexit party, the party that supported Brexit, had kind of a really strong results. And the reason that I think that's interesting is because outside of the United States, the European Union is like the second strongest currency. We're the safest kind of jurisdiction. And when Brexit actually happens and Britain exits the European Union, it kind of is going to start off a chain reaction of then Scotland is going to want to exit Britain and join the UK. There's countries in the EU that want to get out. So it's places like Catalonia. There's parts of Italy that haven't been independent or haven't been dependent for that long. Different countries that have like breakaway movements. And all of a sudden, the project of the European Union and the euro currency is going to start to look less and less likely to last a long time. And so when people start to think about how do they hedge their risk from that, Bitcoin is going to become an option. So that's a recent kind of more political event that happened. But the long-term takeaway effects of that is these like political projects that technocrats are putting together are not going to last a long time. This thing only lasted 40 years, and it involved an enormous amount of effort, and it's completely starting to fail. So it's very exciting times for people who are interested in smaller levels of sovereignty than that.
All right, good take on Brexit and the European situation, tying it into to Bitcoin. JW, your thoughts, your conclusionary thoughts on, or anything you want to add, anything?
Yeah, actually, I'll just say that check out that mathbot.com. That's my main project. I've stepped away from that for, I don't know, the last couple months as I've been trying to work on yeticold.com, but we're back at it. We're working on it. If you are in a situation where you want to move your cold storage to Bitcoin Core, which I highly recommend for a lot of the reasons that we talked about and some of them that we didn't, yeticold.com is my new site. It's basically like a thin Python script that will help you set up Bitcoin Core and enable, QR codes. It does as little as possible and lets Bitcoin Core do the rest. We're in beta now, so if you guys can screw around with it, test it, give me feedback, find bugs, that would be awesome. Other than that, just stay safe. It's going to be an interesting year.
All right, interesting decade on the way here. All right, Benny, you got the final word here.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed combo with everybody. Thanks for being awesome. I guess my general sentiment right now, I really like where we are at in the space in general right now. It kind of feels like the calm before the storm again. It's very reminiscent of the late 2015, early 2016, where we've just seen a bunch of great crap built out that was much needed, but the
BTC Benny.
Sorry. We're pre-halving. There's still like FUD in the air. There's a lot of saltiness. It very much beckons back to that time to me, and I'm excited to see how things progress, especially post-halving and if we do get another mania in the year following that, how much more resilient and robust Bitcoin is to handle new people. So I guess time will tell, but I'm excited to see what the next couple of years hold.
All right, that's a great way to conclude the show. We're entering that golden age decade. But yeah, I was nodding my head. This reminds me a lot of the end of 2015 also. So, okay, dudes, we do This Week in Bitcoin every Friday, and we're live again, and we've got 3 guests again. So, hey, we'll be back next Friday. Remember, I do a new show here every single day. So follow me on Twitter at TechBalt. Come to this channel, Bitcoin Meister, every day you want to. DisruptMeister.com. What else? Oh, yeah, Saturday, that's tomorrow, will be the Beyond Bitcoin show as usual. So thank you, guests. You all rocked the world. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Have a great Friday. I'm Adam Meister, the Bitcoin Meister, Disrupt Meister. Remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, pound that like button, and bang that bell button. Take care, everyone. Thanks a lot again. See ya. All right.